question. Yes, ma'am.
I sort of have three questions now that you brought up Ike. It's something I don't really like to talk about anymore, but we're here.
Okay.
First of all, what are your thoughts on the two different programs that are being discussed to shore up our shoreline? One being the Ike Dike that's being brought out by A&M.
Okay.
And the other up at Rice, which the group is called Speed, and that group wants to build barriers around the Port of Houston and LaPorte and let the rest of us tread water down here when we get the refraction off that surge. So what are your thoughts about pulling the funding? They pulled some funding together pretty quick for New Orleans. I don't think people realize the system that's in place now.
Right. Well, I thank you for that question. I love that. You said Whoop, you're from A&M. You went to A&M.
Absolutely.
Jim, here's another A&M. How many more Aggies do we have in the room? All right, very good. We like to get them. We like to get them identified. Very quickly, I will say, in case y'all didn't hear, Aggie researchers announced yesterday they were so excited because they worked and finally developed a maroon carrot. Did y'all see that? And they were so disappointed to find out that Texas already had an orange one. So, what you're talking about, and I'm not really an expert on the matter. I've heard about this. I was actually in a meeting probably a month and a half ago, where they're talking about an effect, I don't know, would you call it an eddy effect, where when you build out, water swirls on the other side of it and does something with silt and makes a problem,
No.
an unintended consequence? Have I got that backwards?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the surge structure to
Okay.
protect our ports infrastructures from the ship channel, meaning the entrance at Galveston.
Okay.
Out. They're talking about gates at the Galveston Channel opening, and
Okay.
then raising, not extending the seawall, but barriers across through the Bolivar Peninsula. There's a 6-county consortium put together,
Okay.
starting to look at this. They've incorporated an entity.
Right. They had that discussion. I'm not knowledgeable enough on those water currents to really know, but they said when the Texas City Dike was built, it created some silting up, as I remember the discussion, because it changed some of the current flow. Does that sound right? Does that sound right? And I'm not knowledgeable enough to be able to say, well, if you do this up here, it's gonna affect down here. It's kinda like being in the legislature. We gotta be really careful with what we do, because a lot of times we're met with unintended consequences on the backside. Somebody a lot smarter than me would have to study that and tell me, you know, here's the potential for bad, here's the potential for good. I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you.
We just want money to build it
Well,
and
yeah.
study it.
Right. No, I
The
hear you.
Corps is looking for that money.
Right.
The second question, what are your thoughts on pulling all of the disaster recovery out of HUD, which seems to think that storms affect people of lower means and not anyone else, and so it's had a hardship on how this area has had to go about recovery efforts.
My personal belief on those kind of situations is that the federal government needs to be less involved at the state level. Give that money to the states and let them administer that fund, and I can guarantee you that Texas will do a good job of administering ours, because we get it in Texas. Now, I don't know how much money is involved or exactly how that looks in terms of it being allocated to HUD, but I do know this: you get a federal bureaucrat involved, it is not a good thing. You said you had one more.
I know, and now I've lost my thought, but it'll come back
Okay.
to me on the third
I have
one.
a question.
Hey, Steve.
I know that there's a lot of people in this race, and that this is probably gonna be a friendly crowd for you, and I'd like for you to talk about how important it will be for these folks to come back in the runoff election after you get in that runoff, and how much more important their vote is gonna be because of the likely drawdown of the number of voters, because of the runoff is gonna be in July, and how they can really extrapolate their influence by talking to their neighbors and making sure that those folks come back in July in the runoff. And
Absolutely.
how important that is in this election cycle, since it's all put back about 2 months.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. I appreciate that. Of course, because of the redistricting, you know, shoved back to May 29th, which is the day after Memorial Day. How many of y'all early vote? Okay, very good. Not only do you need to do that, which is the best thing, Brennan always tried to do that, but you need to get your friends, your neighbors, your relatives to early vote. And one thing I want y'all to know about that, actually two things. Randy Weber. Randy Weber. But do, please, that's a great point. Get your friends and neighbors and relatives out to vote. You want a conservative, you want somebody that's in business, somebody that has experience, that doesn't need any training. This is gonna be a very critical election, because we've gotta reject Obama's socialistic tendencies. And by the way, let me quote one of my heroes, Ronald Reagan, when he said, maybe y'all remember when he said that socialism only works in two places: heaven where they don't need it, and hell where they already got it. So we've got to reject the socialistic tendency, and Steve's exactly right. I need your help to do that. It is a critical time in our nation, so please spread the word, put out yard signs, get out to vote. If you're not on our email list, get on our email list, get on our call list so we can remind you, get your friends involved, and then the runoff will be extremely critical, because as you well know, the turnout goes way down during a runoff, and I'm gonna need your help twice.
We also can use help if you enjoy phone calling. We have a script, real easy to read.
Right, you bet.
And knocking on doors, we can always use that kind of help too.
And how many of y'all know where my headquarters is? Okay. Ann's been there, Barbara's been there, Ben works there. Well, he shows up and gets a check there from time to time. But no, he does. Ben Hartman. Ben, raise your hands. Ben Hartman, my campaign manager. I'm sorry. He's the guy that's helped put this together, and he kind of keeps us on track. And so I appreciate his help. We're right next door to the GOP headquarters. They're on 45 between 96 and 518. Y'all, how many of y'all know where Alex Rodriguez Mercedes is? Okay, all right. Well, before you go get your Mercedes tuned up, please stop in our headquarters. But that's where we are. Brenda's got a great point. We have 10 phone lines that we do calling. They're little screen driven. You can touch menu, you can press a button, it'll call the next person. If the person says yes, hit this button. So any help in that regard, we would certainly appreciate. Help during the primary, as Steve said, help during the runoff.
Working polls.
Working polls, because it is a critical time in our nation's history. Otherwise, we are gonna lose the country that we grew up in.
Early voting starts Monday.
Early voting starts Monday. Yeah, Bill?
I just want, you mentioned Steve a couple of times. He's our lobbyist in Austin. Very good.
You bet, does a great
He keeps up with it 24, he keeps up with it 12 months a year.
Raise your hands, folks.
He does a great job, but let me just tell you, he cheats at 42.
Everybody does.
So I appreciate him being here, you bet. Any others?
During early voting, you can vote anywhere in the county.
Right.
The Nestler Center is one location, probably the closest here. The West County Annex in Santa Fe, the Annex in League City, the Justice Center, the courthouse in Galveston, the Carver Center in the park.
And I'd like to say one thing in closing. I don't mean to kind of dominate this, but a long time ago in 1986, I ran for the first time in an area around Victoria for the State House, in an area that had 3 counties that didn't have a Republican in any office, not even JP. And I won that race by 17 votes. So I'm not saying that to suggest that I had anything particular to do with that. I do know that my wife had a lot to do with it. But I'm saying that for the purposes of stressing to you, each of you, that if I had had 9 people vote the other way, I would have lost. So don't ever think that you are not important to this candidate, to every candidate that you're interested in, or that talking to your neighbor is futile, or that doing anything that can get one other person to vote, because you never know. We've all seen these stories about people who have lost elections by 1 vote because they didn't go to the polls and vote because they were too busy campaigning. Right. So I guess my point is that everybody here is very important to these elections, and please extrapolate, multiply your influence for Randy by getting out there and making sure that you vote and making sure you talk to people, because 17 votes, 9 people made the difference between, now we have a district in Victoria that is 70% Republican. So you can, and as Randy said, in Galveston County, the whole thing changed, and it changed because of people like you, so.
You bet.
I just wanted to try to emphasize.
That's a great point, Steve, and I'll throw this name out, Mike Jackson, our senator, our great senator. who's now running for the newly created CD 36. He ran against a longtime incumbent Democrat in '88, I think it was, and won by 7, out of 20-something thousand votes, he won by 7 votes. So extrapolate that down, a family of 4 voting the other way could have changed the outcome of that election. So it's extremely important to get out and vote, and I appreciate those words. Thank you. Well, thank y'all very much for being here. Y'all enjoy. Be sure Andy and